Richard Thornton slammed his crystal glass down so hard it cracked, and the wine spread across the white tablecloth like a wound. "You people don't belong here," he said loud enough for 300 guests to hear. He was pointing at Megan Carter, a waitress, a widow, a nobody seated beside the quietest man in the room. The crowd laughed. They had planted her there as a joke. What none of them knew was that the silent man next to her would within the hour make every powerful person in that ballroom go pale. Before we begin, comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. And if you believe in dignity, subscribe and stay till the end. The invitation had come in a cream envelope so heavy it felt like it was meant for someone else. Megan Carter had held it at her kitchen table for 4 days before she made up her mind. The gold lettering said, "Sterling Heights, Annual Firefighters and First Responders, Charity Gala," and underneath in smaller script, "In honored memory of those who gave everything." Her late husband's name was on the list of the fallen. That was the only reason a woman like her would ever get through those doors. "You should go, Mom," her daughter Lily had said. 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, doing homework on the seat of a chair because they didn't have a desk. "Dad would have wanted you to go. It's expensive just to park there, baby. You always say Dad ran into buildings everybody else ran out of." Lily looked up at her with those steady brown eyes that belonged to her father. "So you can walk into one fancy room." Megan had laughed then, the kind of laugh that comes out half a sob. And that was how she ended up standing in the marble lobby of the Sterling Heights Grand Hotel on a Saturday night in a simple black dress she'd bought second-hand and pressed twice her hands cold her shoes a half size too small. She didn't see the trap. Nobody walking into a trap ever does. The woman at the welcome table looked up at her, scanned the printed list, and her smile flickered for just a second, the kind of flicker Megan had learned to read after years of waiting tables. It meant, "You're not the kind of person we expected." "Carter," the woman said. "Megan Carter." "Yes. My husband was Daniel Carter, Engine Company 14. "Of course." The woman's pen hovered. "You're at table 9. Behind the welcome table, a man in a charcoal suit leaned in and murmured something. Megan caught only a fragment. Put her at 9. It'll be perfect. And then a soft laugh that didn't belong at a memorial. She should have left then. Later she would tell herself that 100 times. But she thought of Daniel's name engraved on the wall inside, and she thought of Lily on the kitchen floor, and she squared her shoulders and walked in. The ballroom swallowed her whole. 3 crystal chandeliers hung over a sea of black tie and diamonds. Waiters in white gloves moved between tables carrying trays of champagne. There was a string quartet in the corner playing something soft and expensive. Megan had served at events like this, she had carried those trays, she had worn those white gloves, but she had never once sat down at a table like a guest. She didn't know where to put her hands. A man near the entrance turned to look at her, then nudged the woman beside him, and the woman's eyes traveled all the way down to Megan's shoes and all the way back up. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. Megan felt the heat crawl up her neck. "Table 9 is just over there, ma'am," a young waiter told her. And there was something almost kind in the way he said it, like he wanted to warn her but didn't dare. Table 9 sat at the very edge of the room near a service door where the light from the chandeliers barely reached. 8 chairs, 7 of them empty, and in the 8th a man. He was sitting very still, his hands folded on the table, looking at nothing in particular. He wore a dark suit that fit him well, but called no attention to itself. No flashy watch, no pin, no medal, no badge. His hair was going gray at the temples, and his face had the kind of weathered calm that comes from a life of standing watch over things. He could have been a schoolteacher. He could have been a man who fixed boats. He looked in every way like someone the room had decided didn't matter. That was exactly why they had put her there. Megan didn't understand it yet, but across the ballroom at table 1, Richard Thornton was already smiling into his drink. "Is this seat taken?" Megan asked. The man looked up. His eyes were a pale, steady gray, and when they settled on her, there was none of the appraisal she'd felt from everyone else. He just looked at her like she was a person. "It's all yours." he said. His voice was low and even. "I think we've both been seated at the kids' table." Despite everything, Megan almost smiled. Story of my life. Mine too lately. He actually stood, and pulled out her chair, a small, old-fashioned courtesy that nobody had shown her in years. Adrian Cole. Megan Carter. Pleasure, Mrs. Carter. She sat. He sat. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. Two strangers exiled to the dim corner of a room full of people pretending they didn't exist. "You don't look like you want to be here either," Megan said finally. Adrian let out a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. "I was invited. A friend asked me to come. I owed him." He turned his glass slowly on the tablecloth. "I don't do well in rooms like this." "Why's that?" "Too many people spend the whole night looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important walked in." He met her eyes. "You learn to feel it. The looking." Megan stared at him. Because that was it exactly. That was the thing she'd never had words for, the feeling that had followed her around her entire life, the looking. "Yeah," she said quietly. "You do." The first cruelty came with the salads. A woman from table 6, silver hair, a necklace that probably cost more than Megan's car, drifted over with two of her friends holding her champagne flute like a scepter. She stopped a few feet from table 9 and looked Megan over with open, smiling contempt. "I just had to come say hello," the woman said. "We were all wondering, are you with the catering company, dear? Because you have that look about you. Very capable." Her friends giggled. Megan felt her face burn. The old shame, the one she knew so well. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. "She's a guest," Adrian said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look up right away. But there was something in the flat, level way he said it that made the silver-haired woman's smile twitch. "I'm sorry. She's a guest," Adrian repeated, and now he did look up, and there was nothing soft in his gray eyes. "Same as you. Same table service, same invitation, same memorial. I'd think a little harder before deciding who belongs and who doesn't. You never know who you're talking to." The woman blinked. For half a second, something uncertain crossed her face, and then she recovered, laughed too loudly, and steered her friends away. Well, aren't they sensitive? But she went, and she didn't come back. Megan turned to look at the man beside her. "You didn't have to do that." "No," Adrian agreed. "But somebody should have a long time before tonight." He pushed the bread basket toward her. "Eat something. You've been holding your breath since you walked in." She hadn't realized it, but he was right. She took a roll mostly to have something to do with her hands, and she felt for the first time all evening the smallest loosening in her chest. "Hickey. Can I ask you something?" Megan said after a while. The room had moved on to its first course. The noise of 300 conversations covered them like a curtain. "Why'd you stand up for me? You don't know me." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I know that dress took you a while to decide on," he said. "I know you pressed it twice because I can see the line where the iron went over the same spot. I know you walked in here for someone, not for yourself, because nobody walks into a room that's looking at them like that on their own behalf." He turned his glass again. "And I know you keep glancing at the waiters like you're worried one of them is going to get yelled at. You've worn those shoes. Their shoes, I mean." Megan stared at him. "How do you—" "Because I've been the man nobody at the table thinks is anybody," Adrian said simply. "For a long time. You learn to read a room from the bottom of it. You see more from down here than they'll ever see from up there." A long quiet passed between them. Megan looked down at her plate. "My husband died 3 years ago," she said. She didn't know why she was telling him. Maybe because he was the only person in the room who'd looked at her like she was real. "Daniel. He was a firefighter. There was a fire in an apartment building on the east side, an old building. The wiring was bad, the whole thing went up. He got a family out, a mother and 2 little boys. And then he went back in, because a neighbor said there was a man in a wheelchair on the 3rd floor. Her voice didn't shake. She had told this story enough times that it came out smooth, worn down like a river stone. The floor gave way. They found him the next morning. The man in the wheelchair had already gotten out the back. Daniel didn't know that. Adrian didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't make the face people made. He just nodded slowly like a man receiving something heavy and holding it carefully. He died saving someone who didn't need saving, he said. Yeah. That's the worst kind. And the best kind. Adrian looked at her. He didn't know, so in his heart he died saving a man's life. The truth doesn't change what he was. Megan felt her throat close. Nobody had ever said it like that. 3 years of casseroles and thoughts and prayers and pamphlets from the department, and nobody had once told her the thing she had needed to hear, that what Daniel believed in his last moment was as true as anything in the world. We have a daughter, she said, blinking hard. Lily, she's 8. She does her homework on the kitchen floor because we don't have a desk, and she told me Dad ran into buildings everybody else ran out of so I could walk into one fancy room. A wet laugh broke out of her. That's why I'm here. An 8-year-old talked me into it. Adrian's mouth moved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but was warmer than one. Smart kid. She's the only thing I got right. I doubt that's true. He paused. I have a daughter, too. Sophie. She's 10. Her mother passed 2 years ago, cancer the fast kind. One day she had a backache, and 4 months later she was gone. He said it the way Megan had said her own piece in a voice sanded smooth by repetition. It's just the two of us now. I missed a lot of years before that. The work. I was away more than I was home, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that math come out even. It won't. But I'll spend it anyway. Megan looked at this quiet, plain man who'd been seated at the edge of the room like a piece of furniture, and she felt the strangest thing: recognition. Like meeting someone from her own country in a foreign place. What is it you do, Adrian? She asked. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not deception exactly, more like a man deciding how much weather to report. Navy, he said. I'm in the Navy. That's why you don't fidget, Megan said. You sit like you're used to standing watch. He almost laughed. Something like that. What Megan couldn't know, what nobody at table 9 could see, was that across the ballroom, the joke was being savored. Richard Thornton, chairman of the Gala Committee, 61 years old, third-generation wealth and not a day's honest labor in any of it, sat at table 1 with a glass of bourbon and a pleased expression. Beside him, a younger man on the committee leaned over. You actually did it? The younger man murmured. You sat the waitress next to the boat guy. Carter and Cole, Richard said, rolling the names around like dice. The 2 saddest reservations on the list. I checked them both myself. She's a literal waitress, works at some diner on Route 9. And him? Richard waved a dismissive hand. Nobody could tell me a thing about him. Some friend of Harlan's put him on the list. No company, no foundation, no donation history. Just a name. A nobody plus a nobody. I thought they'd be more comfortable together. The younger man laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. That's cold, Richard. It's curation, Richard corrected. This is a room full of donors. Real donors. People who write checks with 6 figures on them. You don't seat them next to charity. You give the charity its own little corner, so everyone can feel good about it from a distance. He sipped his bourbon. Watch. By dessert she'll have cried in the bathroom and left early. They always do. It's practically a tradition. He had no idea. He had stood at the welcome desk himself and made the joke himself, and he had no idea that the gray-haired nobody he'd dismissed without a second thought was the most dangerous man in the building. Back at table 9, the evening had taken an unexpected turn. It had become, against all odds, almost pleasant. Adrian and Megan talked. Not the polite, hollow talk of strangers, but the real kind, the kind 2 people fall into when they discover they speak the same private language of loss. They talked about the strange arithmetic of grief, how you could be fine for weeks, and then a song in a grocery store would take you down at the knees. They talked about their kids, about parent-teacher conferences attended alone, about Christmas mornings that were both too quiet and too loud. They talked about money carefully, the way poor people and rich people both circle the subject, but for opposite reasons. You don't talk like a man with money, Megan observed at one point. I don't think about it much, Adrian said. Money's a tool, a hammer. You don't admire a hammer, you just want it to drive the nail. He paused. My wife used to say I had a working man's heart in a... He stopped. She used to say I never knew how to spend a dollar. Smart woman. She was. The smartest. He looked down. She'd have hated this party. She'd have looked around this room and said, Adrian, every one of these people thinks they're the point of the story. And then she'd have found the one waitress in the corner and spent the whole night talking to her. His gray eyes came up to meet Megan's. Funny. Looks like I did exactly that. Megan felt her face go warm, and for the first time the warmth had nothing to do with shame. A waiter came by the young one from before and refilled Adrian's water glass. As he did, he leaned in slightly and said under his breath, It's an honor to serve you tonight, sir. I just want you to know that. Megan caught it. Adrian gave the young man the smallest shake of his head, not now, and the waiter straightened and moved on, his ears red. What was that? Megan asked. Nothing, Adrian said. Kids these days, very polite. But she had seen the way the boy looked at him. It was the look people gave Daniel once, when he wore the uniform into the diner, a look of awe so deep the person wearing it couldn't quite hide it. She filed it away and said nothing. The cruelty came back with the main course, and this time it had a name. Richard Thornton had grown bored at table 1. The waitress hadn't cried yet. She hadn't fled to the bathroom. In fact, every time he glanced over at table 9 she seemed... Was she laughing? Was the boat guy making her laugh? This was not how the joke was supposed to go. A joke that didn't land was just an embarrassment, and Richard Thornton did not tolerate embarrassment, especially not his own. So he stood, straightened his jacket, took his bourbon, and made his way across the ballroom, toward the dim corner with 3 of his committee friends trailing behind him, like a wake. Mrs. Carter, he said, arriving at the table with his arms spread wide, performing for the tables nearby that had begun to watch. I just wanted to come over personally and make sure our most humble guest was being looked after. I'm Richard Thornton. I run this little gathering. Megan looked up at him. Every instinct she had, the instinct of a woman who'd waited tables for 15 years and learned to manage difficult men, told her this one was dangerous. It's a lovely evening, Mr. Thornton, she said carefully. Thank you for having me. Oh, it's our pleasure. He drew the word out like taffy. You know we love having the families here, the fallen and all that. It's so important to remember the help, the people who do the dirty work so the rest of us don't have to. He smiled around at his friends. Your husband, was it, a firefighter? He was. Noble work, dangerous. Doesn't pay much though, does it? That's the tragedy of it. Richard shook his head with a theatrical sadness. These men give their lives, and they leave their families with nothing. No safety net. And then we have nights like this where good people can write a check and feel like they've done their part. He leaned down toward her, and his voice dropped into something poisonous. So tell me, dear, how does it feel to be the reason this whole party exists, to be the cause? The tables nearby had gone quiet. People were watching openly now. A few were smiling. Megan's hands had begun to tremble in her lap. She thought of Lily on the kitchen floor. She thought of Daniel's name on the wall. She thought of every shift she'd worked on aching feet, every dollar she'd stretched, every time she'd swallowed her pride, so her daughter wouldn't have to. And she felt it all rising up in her like floodwater against a dam. And she knew that if she opened her mouth, she would either scream or cry, and either one would be the joke landing finally exactly the way Richard Thornton wanted. You don't have to answer that, Adrian said quietly. Richard turned, noticing the gray-haired man fully for the first time. His lip curled. I'm sorry, and you are. I don't believe we've met. I make a point of knowing everyone who matters in this room, and I don't know you at all. No, Adrian said. You don't. Cole, isn't it? Richard squinted at the place card. Adrian Cole. I had to dig to find anything on you, and you know what? I found nothing. No foundation, no company, no reason to be here at all except some favor someone called in. He smiled, pleased with his own thoroughness. So, I'll be honest with you, Mr. Cole. The way I'm honest with everyone, you and Mrs. Carter here are at this table for the same reason. You're the bottom of the guest list. You're the charity. And there's no shame in that, but let's not pretend we're equals. A few people laughed. Adrian set down his fork. He did it slowly, deliberately, the way a man sets down a thing he won't need for a while. And then he looked up at Richard Thornton, and something in the room changed, a shift in pressure, like the air before a storm. "Mr. Thornton," Adrian said, and his voice was so calm it made the laughter die. "You've spent the last 2 minutes telling this woman she's nothing. You've told her that her husband died for too little money in front of a room full of strangers on the night that's supposed to honor him. You've called her a charity case to her face." He paused. "I want you to take a moment, a real one, and I want you to ask yourself whether you're absolutely certain that you understand who you're talking to. Either of us." Richard laughed, but it was a beat too late and a shade too high. "Is that a threat?" "No," Adrian said. "It's a courtesy. The only one you've offered anyone tonight, and you didn't even offer it. I did it for you." He looked at the place card with his own name on it, then back up at Richard. "You said you make a point of knowing everyone who matters in this room. I'd think very carefully, Mr. Thornton, about whether you've actually done that. Because a man who's certain he knows everything is a man who's about to find out he doesn't." For a long, suspended moment, the two men looked at each other. And Richard Thornton, for all his money, for all his certainty, felt the first cold finger of doubt slide down his spine. There was something in the gray-haired man's stillness that didn't fit. Powerful men recognize power the way predators recognize predators in the gut, before the mind catches up. And Richard's gut was telling him very quietly that he had made a mistake. But Richard Thornton had never in his life backed down from a person he'd decided was beneath him. His pride wouldn't let him start now. "You know what?" he said, forcing the sneer back onto his face, raising his voice so the watching tables could hear. "I think you're exactly what you look like. A nobody sitting next to a nobody, telling me how to run my event." He turned to the room, arms wide, playing to his audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, our charity guests are getting spirited tonight." The laughter came again, louder, crueler. And Megan, who had been silent through all of it, who had swallowed every insult since she'd walked through the door, felt the dam break. Not with tears, with something harder. She stood up. The legs of her chair scraped against the floor, and the sound cut through the laughter like a blade. 300 people turned to look at the waitress in the second-hand black dress standing alone at the edge of the room. "My husband," Megan said, and her voice did not shake, "ran into a burning building to save a man he'd never met. He died on a floor that gave way underneath him in the dark, in the smoke, doing the only thing he ever knew how to do, which was to put other people before himself." She looked Richard Thornton dead in the eye. "You stand up here in your $1,000 suit and you call that cheap. You call him cheap. You take his name and his sacrifice, and you turn it into a party where people like you can feel good about yourselves for one night a year." Her chin lifted. "He was worth more in the last 10 seconds of his life than you've been worth in all of yours. And I would rather be the charity case in this room than be you. I would rather be nothing than be what you are." The silence that followed was absolute. And into that silence, into the frozen, stunned hush of 300 wealthy people who had never once been spoken to that way by a waitress, came a new voice. A young voice. The voice of the waiter who had refilled Adrian's water. He had been standing near the service door watching the whole thing unfold, holding an empty tray, and he could not contain himself 1 second longer. He stepped forward, his face flushed with anger on Megan's behalf, and something close to disbelief that nobody else in the room seemed to know, and he said loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, "Sir, Captain Cole, are you all right? Do you need me to get hotel security to remove this man?" He turned to Richard and his voice cracked with the force of it. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? This is Captain Adrian Cole. He's—" "Son," Adrian said. But it was too late. The word captain had already landed in the room like a stone in still water, and the ripples were spreading outward, table by table, face by face. And at table 9, Megan Carter still standing, still trembling, still magnificent in her anger, turned slowly to look at the quiet plain man beside her. The man who fixed boats, the man who sat like he was standing, watched the man who had read her whole life off a crease in her dress. "Adrian," she said softly. "What is he talking about?" And Adrian Cole looked up at her, not at Richard, not at the room, but at her with an expression that was almost an apology. "I was going to tell you," he said, "just not like this." The young waiter froze the empty tray still in his hands, his ears burning. He had not meant to set off a bomb. But he had, and now there was no taking it back. "Captain Cole," he said again, quieter this time, like a boy who'd realized too late he'd spoken in church. "I'm sorry, sir. I just couldn't stand there and watch them." "It's all right, son," Adrian said. "Go on back to your station. You did nothing wrong." The waiter went, but the word he'd dropped did not go with him. It hung over table 9, over table 1, over the whole frozen ballroom, spreading from mouth to ear, in a low electric murmur that built and built until it was a sound of its own. "Captain." He said Captain. "Captain Cole. Who is that? Who is he?" "Captain of what?" Richard Thornton stood very still, his bourbon glass halfway to his mouth, and for the first time all night the smile was gone from his face. Not because he understood he didn't not yet, but because every animal that has ever lived knows the sound of a room turning, and the room was turning, and it was turning away from him. "Captain," Richard repeated. He set the glass down on table 9 without asking. "Captain of what exactly?" "A fishing boat." "You'll forgive me if I'm not impressed by a title some yacht club handed out." Nobody laughed this time. That was the thing Richard noticed. The thing that made the cold finger on his spine press a little harder. 2 minutes ago, the whole room had laughed when he wanted it to. Now he made the same kind of joke, and it fell into silence and died there. "Adrian," Megan said again. She was still on her feet. Her anger had carried her up out of her chair, but now confusion was tangled all through it, and her voice came out small. "Please." "What is he talking about?" Adrian rose slowly from his seat. He did not do it for show. He did it the way a man stands when he has decided that the time for sitting is over, and there was something in the simple act of it. The unhurried, settled weight of him coming up to his full height that made the nearest tables go quiet on instinct. "Mrs. Carter," he said, and he said it to her only to her as though the 300 people were not there at all. "I told you I was in the Navy. That was true. I just didn't tell you all of it." He glanced once at Richard, then back to her. "I should have. I'm sorry you're finding out this way." "All of what?" "Captain Adrian Cole," came another voice, older this time, from 2 tables over. An elderly man in a gray suit had risen slowly, leaning on a cane, and he was staring at Adrian with an expression Megan couldn't read. "United States Navy. Are you, forgive an old man's eyes, are you the same Adrian Cole who commanded the Reliant during the Gulf evacuation?" The murmur in the room changed pitch. Adrian turned toward the old man, and something in his face softened. "I am, sir. My grandson was on that ship," the old man said. His voice cracked on the word grandson. "He was 19 years old. He came home because you brought him home. Every boy on that vessel came home." He lowered himself back into his chair, but he kept his eyes on Adrian, and now there were tears standing in them. "I never thought I'd get to thank you to your face." A silence fell over the ballroom that was different from the one before. The first silence had been the silence of cruelty interrupted. This one was the silence of 300 people realizing all at once that they had been laughing at the wrong man. That's hearsay," Richard said, but his voice had lost its bottom. "Anyone can tell a war story." "It's not a war story, Mr. Thornton," said a woman's voice, and this one made the room turn again, because it belonged to Eleanor Vance, the silver-haired chairwoman of the Sterling Heights Foundation itself, who had been seated at the head table and who had not, until this moment, said a single word all evening. She was on her feet now, and her face had gone the color of paper. "I have been trying to get a meeting with Captain Cole for 14 months. 14 months. His name is on the short list for the Coastal Resilience Fund, $800 million in federal and private development money, and he sits on the board that decides where every dollar of it goes. I have written him letters, Richard. I have had my people call his people. She turned slowly to look at Adrian, and her hand had come up to her mouth. And you walked into my gala. And I didn't even nobody told me you were. Nobody knew, Adrian said simply. I asked Harlan to put me on the list quietly, as a favor. I didn't come for the fund, Mrs. Vance. I came because Harlan's daughter is a Navy nurse, and he wanted me to meet some of the families. His gray eyes moved across the room slow and level, and wherever they landed people seemed to shrink an inch. I wanted to see who you all were when you didn't know anybody important was watching. The sentence dropped into the room and detonated without a sound, because every single person in that ballroom understood in the same terrible instant exactly what they had been doing for the last 2 hours. The looks, the giggles, the silver-haired woman who'd asked if Megan was catering, the laughter. God, the laughter every time Richard Thornton had twisted the knife into the widow at the corner table. They had performed their cruelty freely, generously, because they had believed no one who mattered was looking, and the man who mattered most in the room had been sitting in the dark at the kids' table, watching all of it. Now you know, Adrian said quietly. Richard Thornton made one last attempt to save himself. It was the instinct of a drowning man, and it had all the dignity of one. Captain Cole Adrian, if I'd had any idea, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. The seating was a clerical error, an oversight I never personally. You sat us here yourself, Adrian said. You told a young man at the welcome desk to put us at 9 because it would be perfect. He told me. He thought I should know what kind of man was hosting the evening. He paused. And you didn't do it because of a clerical error. You did it because you looked at this woman and at me, and you decided we were small enough to be funny. That's the part you should be apologizing for, Mr. Thornton. Not the title you didn't know I had. The contempt you showed when you thought I didn't have one. Richard's mouth worked. Now see here. You called her husband cheap. Adrian's voice never rose. That was the terrible thing about it. Megan would think later he never once raised his voice, and somehow that made every word land like a hammer. You stood over a widow on the night meant to honor her dead husband, and you told her his life was worth too little money, in front of all these people, and they laughed because you told them to. He looked around the room. Did it feel good? Any of you? Does it feel good now? Nobody answered. Nobody could. And Megan stood there in the middle of it between the man she had thought was a nobody and the man who had spent 2 hours making her feel like one, and she felt something she had no name for. It was not triumph. It was too big and too strange to be triumph. It was the feeling of the entire world she had lived in, a world that had spent 3 years telling her in 1,000 small ways that she did not matter. Suddenly tipping over and falling on its side while she stood untouched in the center of it. Adrian, she said very quietly, you let them do it. You sat there and you let them laugh at me, and you knew the whole time that one word from you would stop it. Her voice was not angry. It was wounded, and that was worse. Why? The room held its breath. Because it was the only question that mattered now. And even Richard Thornton, white-faced and ruined, wanted to hear the answer. Adrian turned to face her fully. And for the first time all evening, the calm cracked just a little, just at the edges, enough for Megan to see that underneath it, there was a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. Because I didn't want to save you, he said. Megan flinched. No, listen to me. Let me say it right. Adrian took a breath. When I walked in here tonight, I was nobody. They put me at the worst table in the room, and they forgot about me before I'd sat down. And then you came in, and they did the same thing to you, and I watched it happen. I watched that woman ask if you were the help. I watched you not be able to find the words to answer her, because you've been made small so many times you've half started to believe it. His jaw tightened. And I thought, if I stand up right now and say my name, this whole room will fall at my feet, and they'll fall at yours too, but only because they're at mine. They'll be kind to you because they're afraid of me. And that's not respect, Megan. That's just fear wearing a nicer suit. You'd walk out of here tonight having been rescued by a man with a title, and you'd have learned the exact lesson they've been teaching you your whole life, that you're only worth something when somebody powerful decides you are. Megan's eyes were filling now. She didn't try to stop them. So I waited, Adrian went on. I waited because I needed to see if you'd stand up on your own. Not for me to defend you, for you to defend you. His voice dropped. And you did. You stood up in front of 300 people who'd been laughing at you, and you told the most powerful man in this room exactly what your husband was worth and exactly what he wasn't. You didn't need me, Megan. You never did. I just needed everybody in this room to see it. He glanced just once at the stunned faces all around them, including you. The silence stretched, and then, from somewhere in the back of the room, somebody began to clap. It was the young waiter. He had set down his tray. His face was wet, and he didn't care who saw it, and he was clapping alone, his hands cracking out across the silence like the first drops of rain before a storm. And then, the old man with the cane joined him, struggling up out of his chair again, his palms coming together slowly. And then Eleanor Vance. And then a couple at table 4, and a man at table 7, and a young woman at the head table who had spent the whole night too afraid to speak. And then it was the whole ballroom, 300 people on their feet, and the applause rolled forward over table 9 like a wave finally reaching the shore. It was not for Adrian. Megan understood that even through her tears. They were not clapping for the captain. They were clapping for the waitress in the second-hand black dress, the widow, the nobody, the joke who had stood up and refused to be the joke any longer. The applause was washing over her, and it was the first time in 3 years that a room full of people had looked at her and seen something they admired. I don't... She started and couldn't finish. You earned that, Adrian said low, just for her. Every clap. That's yours. Richard Thornton stood marooned in the middle of the applause like a man on a rock in a rising tide. Nobody was looking at him anymore. That, for a man like Richard, was a death of its own. But the night was not finished with him yet. Eleanor Vance had stopped clapping. She had crossed the floor. Actually crossed the open floor of the ballroom in front of everyone, and she came to a stop beside table 9, and her face was hard. Now hard and pale, and decided. Richard, she said, I think you should sit down. Eleanor, sit down. She did not raise her voice either. It seemed to run in the family of powerful people, this gift of making a room obey at a whisper. You have embarrassed this foundation. You have embarrassed me. You stood in front of our donors, our honored families, and a member of the Coastal Resilience Board, and you spent the evening mocking a fallen firefighter's widow for sport. Her lip curled. We will discuss the chairmanship on Monday. Tonight, you will sit down, and you will be quiet, and you will pray that the only thing you lost was your dignity. You can't! Richard's voice climbed toward panic. Eleanor, I have given this foundation more money than anyone in this room. You don't get to... You think this is about your money? Eleanor stared at him as if he were a stranger she'd found in her house. Captain Cole has been sitting at the worst table in my ballroom for 2 hours, watching how the people in this room treat those they think are beneath them. He came to find out who we are. Her voice shook with something close to fear. And what did he find, Richard? He found you. He found all of us laughing along with you. Do you have the faintest idea what that costs? Not in dollars, in everything else. She turned away from him. Sit down. You've done enough. And Richard Thornton, chairman, third-generation wealth, a man who had never in his life been told to sit down, sat down. He sank into an empty chair at table 9, the very table he had built to mock the people he thought beneath him. And he put his face in his hands, and he did not get up again. Eleanor turned to Adrian. The hardness left her face, replaced by something almost pleading. Captain Cole, I cannot tell you how there are no words for how, if there is anything I can do to... There is, Adrian said. The whole room leaned in. You can stop talking to me, he said, and start talking to her. He nodded toward Megan. She came here tonight because her husband died saving lives, and your foundation invited her to honor that. And then you put her at the back of the room and let a bully make her cry. If you want to make something right tonight, Mrs. Vance, it's not with me. I don't need anything from you. She's the one this whole night was supposed to be for. Eleanor Vance turned to Megan. And for a moment, the chairwoman of the Sterling Heights Foundation, a woman worth more than Megan would earn in 100 lifetimes, did not know what to say to a waitress in a second-hand dress. Mrs. Carter, she said finally, I am ashamed of myself, of all of us. I let this happen in my own house and I told myself it was somebody else's cruelty, when the truth is I sat at the head table and I did nothing. She drew a breath. Your husband's name is on our memorial wall. Tomorrow morning, I am going to read every name on that wall, and I am going to think about the fact that behind each one is a family we say we honor, and then seat in the dark. That stops. I promise you it stops. And it starts with an apology to you from me in front of everyone who watched you be humiliated. She lowered her head. I'm sorry. I am so deeply sorry. Megan did not know what to do with an apology like that. She had spent 3 years being handed pamphlets and pity, and now the most powerful woman in the room was bowing her head to her, and it was too much. All of it was too much, and she felt her knees go loose. Adrian's hand found her elbow. Steady. Just enough. Breathe, he murmured. I've got you. You don't have to perform for them either. You can just stand here and breathe. I want to go home, Megan whispered. Only he heard it. Adrian, I want to go home. I want to see my daughter. I can't all these people looking at me. I can't. Then we'll go, he said simply. You don't owe this room one more second. But before they could move, the old man with the cane spoke again. He had not sat back down. He had been standing the whole time leaning on his cane watching Megan with those wet, fierce old eyes. Young lady, he said. May I tell you something, an old man's privilege? Megan turned to him. Of course, sir. My grandson came home from that ship because of the man beside you, the old man said. But do you know why I came to this gala tonight? Not for the dancing, not for the dinner. I came because my grandson is a firefighter now. He followed your husband's kind of calling. His voice broke and steadied. And I have spent the whole evening watching these people treat the families of the fallen like ornaments, like decoration, and I have been too much of a coward to say a word. Until you stood up. He pointed his cane at her gently. You did what I should have done. A waitress in a black dress shamed a room full of millionaires into remembering what this night is for. That's not nothing, young lady. That's about the bravest thing I've seen since the war. And Megan Carter, who had walked into this room 2 hours ago certain she did not belong, looked around at 300 people who were all, every one of them, looking back at her with something she had never once seen aimed in her direction. Respect. Thank you, she managed. Thank you, sir. Captain. Eleanor Vance said, Please at least let me have a car brought around for you both. The front entrance away from the there are some press here tonight, society pages, and once word of who you are gets out. Side door's fine, Adrian said. We'll slip out quiet, the way we came in. A faint, tired humor touched his mouth. Nobody'll notice two nobodies leaving. It got a laugh, a real one, a warm one. The first kind laughter the room had produced all night. And the awful thing, the thing that turned Richard Thornton's face gray where he sat with his head in his hands, was how badly the room wanted to laugh with Adrian. Now, how desperate every one of them was to be on the right side of him, to be forgiven, to be seen as one of the good ones. 2 hours ago, they would have stepped over Megan Carter in the street. Now they were falling over themselves to be near her, because she had been blessed by the touch of a powerful man's regard. Adrian saw it. Of course he saw it. He saw everything. Mrs. Carter, he said loud enough now for the room to hear. I'd like to walk you to your car, if you'll let me. Megan looked at him, at this strange, impossible man. I took the bus. There's no car. A ripple went through the listening crowd. Of course there was no car. She was a waitress. She had taken the bus to the Sterling Heights Grand Hotel in her one good dress to honor a dead husband, and they had seated her in the dark and laughed. Then I'll drive you, Adrian said without a beat of hesitation. It's the least a nobody can do for another nobody. He offered her his arm, the same old-fashioned courtesy he'd shown when he pulled out her chair 2 hours and a whole lifetime ago. Shall we? Megan looked at the arm. She looked at the room full of people watching to see what the waitress would do. And then she looked at Richard Thornton slumped and ruined in the chair he had built to mock her. And she found that she felt no triumph there either. Just a tired kind of pity. The man had spent his whole life believing the worst lie ever told, that some people are worth more than others. And tonight, the lie had finally come for him, and there was nothing underneath it. Nothing at all. "You know what, Mr. Thornton," she said. He looked up. The whole room held still. "I forgive you," Megan said. "Not because you deserve it. Because I've got a daughter at home who's going to ask me how my night was, and I'd rather tell her I left this room without any hate in me than tell her I got even." She lifted her chin. "That's the difference between us. I get to go home and be a good thing for somebody. You just get to go home." And then she took Adrian Cole's arm, and the two of them, the waitress and the captain, the two nobodies from Table 9, walked the length of the ballroom together through 300 people who parted before them like water all the way to the door. She did not look back, but Adrian did once at the threshold. He stopped, and he turned, and he found Eleanor Vance in the crowd, and he said one last thing in that quiet level voice that somehow carried to every corner of the silent room. "You honor the dead by how you treat the living," he said. "Remember that the next time you make a seating chart." Then he pushed open the side door, and the cool night air rushed in, and they were gone. Behind them, the gala did not recover. The string quartet tried to start up again and gave up after a few bars. People drifted toward the exits in twos and threes, subdued, unable to look one another in the eye. The night that was supposed to make them feel good about themselves had instead held up a mirror, and not one of them had liked what they saw in it. And in the parking lot, under a sky full of cold spring stars, Megan Carter stopped walking, let go of Adrian's arm, and turned to face him. "I don't even know who you are," she said. "I sat next to you for 2 hours, and I told you everything about Daniel, about Lily, about the floor. I do my crying on so my daughter won't hear. And I don't know the first true thing about you." "That's not true," Adrian said. "You know the truest thing about me. You knew it before you knew my name. And what's that?" He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had walked into a room as a joke and walked out of it as something else entirely. "That I'm a single father," he said, "who lost his wife, and who's been looking for 2 years for one single person in this whole world who'd look at me and not see a title or a uniform or a war story. Just see a man trying to raise his little girl right and not knowing if he's doing any of it the way her mother would have wanted." His voice roughened. "And tonight at the worst table in the worst room I finally found one. She thought I fixed boats." Megan let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. "You let me think you were nobody," she said. "I was nobody," Adrian said. "To them. That was the only time all night I felt like the real me." He shook his head slowly. "You want to know the secret, Megan? The secret isn't that I'm a captain. The secret is that I'd rather be the nobody who got to talk to you for 2 hours than the captain everybody in that room is going to spend the rest of their lives pretending they always respected." The wind moved between them. Somewhere far off a car door shut. "I have to ask you something," Adrian said, "and you can say no, and it won't change a thing about how I drive you home or how I think of you. But I have to ask it." Megan's heart was beating very hard. "Ask." "My Sophie," he said. "She's 10. She does her homework at the kitchen table because I finally bought her a desk and she won't use it, says the kitchen's where I am." A crooked, aching smile. "And your Lily does hers on the kitchen floor. And I keep thinking about the two of them. 2 girls who lost a parent raised by 2 parents who lost a spouse." He took a breath. "I'm not asking you for anything tonight except this. Would you let me take you and Lily to breakfast tomorrow? Somewhere with terrible coffee and a kid's menu. No gala. No titles. Just 4 people who know exactly what the other ones are carrying." And Megan Carter, standing in a parking lot in her one good dress, looked at the quiet man who had watched her become brave and felt something she had been certain she would never feel again, break open softly inside her chest. There's a diner on Route 9, she said. The coffee's terrible. I should know. I work there. Adrian smiled, really smiled the whole way, for the first time all night. Then it's perfect, he said. The drive home was quiet for the first few minutes, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Adrian kept both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road, and Megan watched the streetlights slide across the windshield, and neither of them said a word until they turned off the highway onto the streets that led toward her side of town, the streets that got narrower and darker and more honest the farther they went from Sterling Heights. You can let me out at the corner, Megan said. You don't have to see where I live. Why would I let you out at the corner? Because. She gestured vaguely at the cracked sidewalks that chain-link the laundromat with the buzzing sign. Because this isn't your part of town, Captain. Adrian was quiet for a second. Then he said, You know what my part of town looked like growing up? My father drove a delivery truck. My mother cleaned offices at night so she could be home when we got off the bus. We lived over a hardware store, and in the summer, the whole apartment smelled like turpentine, and I thought that was just what summer smelled like until I was 9 years old, and went to a friend's house that didn't. He pulled the car gently to the curb in front of her building, exactly where she lived, not at the corner. Don't ever tell me which parts of town are mine. I earned the right to drive down any street I please, and I earned it the same way your Daniel earned his by being the kind of man who runs toward the thing everybody else runs from. The uniform doesn't change where I come from. Nothing changes where you come from. It just changes whether you're ashamed of it. Megan sat with that. I'm not ashamed of it, she said finally. I'm protective of it. There's a difference. There is, Adrian agreed. And I'm sorry. You're right. He put the car in park and turned to look at her. It's a good street. You raised your girl here. There's nothing on it you need to apologize for. Up in the window on the second floor, a curtain twitched. Megan saw it, and her whole face changed. That's her. That's Lily. She's supposed to be asleep. Mrs. Okafor from next door watches her. She always says she'll put her down by 9, and she never does. She was already reaching for the door handle, and then she stopped her hand on it and turned back. Adrian, about the morning, about breakfast. You're about to take it back. I'm about to be honest with you, Megan said, which is that I don't know what tonight was. I don't know if it was real or if it was just two sad people in a bad room finding each other for a couple of hours. And I've got a little girl up in that window who's already lost one person she loved more than her own life. I can't bring people into her world that I'm not sure about. I can't let her get attached to a man and then have him disappear back into a life that's got nothing to do with ours. So before you knock on my door tomorrow, I need you to be sure, not polite sure, sure. Because if you're not, it's kinder to never come at all. Adrian didn't answer right away. He looked up at the window where the curtain had twitched again, where a small shadow was waiting for her mother to come home. 2 years ago, he said, I made my daughter a promise. I told her I wasn't going to bring anybody into her life unless I was certain that person would be good for her. Not for me, for her. And I've kept that promise, Megan, because it was easy to keep. There hasn't been anyone. Not one single person who made me even think about breaking it. He turned to look at her. And then I watched a waitress in a second-hand dress stand up in front of 300 people who'd been laughing at her and tell the most powerful man in the room exactly what her husband was worth. And the first thing I thought, the very first thing before anything else was, I want Sophie to meet her. I want my daughter to know there are women in this world like that. His jaw worked. So don't ask me if I'm sure. I'm telling you, I haven't been this sure about anything since the day I married Sophie's mother. That doesn't mean it's love. It's too soon for that, and I'm too old to pretend otherwise. But it means I will not waste your daughter's heart or yours. That's the only promise I can make tonight, and I'm making it. Whoa, yeah. Megan's eyes were wet. She nodded once and couldn't speak. Go on up, Adrian said gently. She's waiting. I'll be at the diner at 8. If you're there, you're there. If you decide overnight that this is too much, you don't even have to call. I'll have a cup of bad coffee, and I'll understand, and I won't think one less thing of you for it. But I'll be there at 8. Megan got out of the car. She got halfway to the door, then turned around and came back and leaned down to the window he'd rolled down. "For the record," she said, "I wasn't asking if you were sure for my sake. I already know what I felt. I was asking for hers." She glanced up at the window. "And for the record, I'll be there at 8. Both of us will. Now go home to your daughter, Captain. It's late." She watched his taillights until they turned the corner. Then she went up the stairs 2 at a time, and when she opened the door, Lily was standing right there in the middle of the living room in her pajamas, having clearly run from the window the second she heard the lock, and Mrs. Okafor was asleep on the couch with the television murmuring. "Mom," Lily whispered, eyes huge. "There was a car, a nice one. Who drove you home in a nice car?" Megan knelt down and pulled her daughter into her arms and held on a little longer than usual. "A friend," she said into Lily's hair. "A new friend. His name is Adrian, and he has a little girl named Sophie who's 10, and tomorrow morning we're all going to have breakfast together at the diner. How's that sound?" Lily pulled back and studied her mother's face with that uncanny steady seriousness she'd inherited from her father. "Were you crying?" "A little." "The good kind or the bad kind?" Megan laughed and it came out wet. "Baby, I'm not even sure there's a name for the kind it was, but it was a good night. It was the best night I've had in a long, long time. Now come on. You should have been asleep 3 hours ago, and we've got a big morning." But Lily didn't move toward the bedroom. She stood there frowning, working something out. "Mom, did the rich people at the party treat you nice?" The question went straight through Megan like a blade, because Lily was 8 years old, and she already knew. She already knew the way the world looked at her mother. She'd seen it at her own school, at the grocery store, in the eyes of teachers and other kids' parents, the same looking Adrian had named at the table. And the fact that her daughter had been carrying that knowledge, had been worrying about it while she waited at the window, broke something open in Megan that even the gala hadn't reached. She got back down on her knees, so she was eye to eye with her girl. "Some of them were not nice at all," Megan said. She had decided in that instant never to lie to her daughter about the world. "Some of them were the meanest people I've ever met, baby. There was a man there who said some terrible things to me in front of everybody." Lily's face crumpled with fury. "What did you do?" "I stood up," Megan said. "I stood up in front of all of them, and I told them about your dad. I told them he ran into a burning building to save a man he never met, and that made him worth more than every rich person in that whole room put together. And you know what happened." "What?" "Everybody clapped," Megan whispered. 300 people stood up and clapped for me. For us. For your dad." Her voice broke. "And the man who drove me home tonight, Adrian, he's the one who taught me I could do it. He sat there next to me at the worst table in the room, and he made me feel for the first time since Daddy died like I was a person worth listening to. So when I tell you he's a friend, Lily, I mean it. He's a good one." Lily threw her arms around her mother's neck. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said. And Megan, who had spent 3 years being the one who said those words, and not the one who heard them, came apart quietly on the living room floor of her too small apartment, holding the one thing she'd ever gotten completely right. She didn't sleep much. She lay awake going over it, the cream envelope, the welcome desk, the silver-haired woman, Richard Thornton's poison. The moment she stood up, the moment the room turned, the moment a young waiter said the word "Captain," and the floor fell out of the world. By the time the gray light came up in the window, she'd half convinced herself she'd dreamed all of it, that no man like that existed, that he wouldn't be at the diner. That the kindest thing the universe could do was let her keep the memory clean and never test it against the morning. But at 10 to 8, she put on her good jeans and her one nice sweater, and she got Lily into her favorite dress, and they walked the 4 blocks to the diner on Route 9, where Megan had poured 1,000 cups of bad coffee for 1,000 tired truckers. And she pushed open the door she had pushed open 10,000 times before, and there he was, Adrian Cole, in a booth by the window, out of the dark suit and into a flannel shirt and an old navy ball cap, looking once again exactly like a man who fixed boats. And across from him, kneeling up on the vinyl seat to draw on the back of a paper placemat, was a little girl with his same steady gray eyes. "You came," Adrian said, and the relief in his voice was so plain, so completely unguarded, that it undid every doubt Megan had spent the night building. I told you I would. People say a lot of things at midnight in a parking lot. 8 a.m. is a different country. He stood up that same courtesy every time and gestured to the booth. Megan Carter, Lily Carter. I'd like you to meet Sophie. The little girl looked up from her drawing. She had her father's gravity, the same unhurried way of taking the measure of a person, and for a second she and Lily just studied each other across the great gulf that exists between any two children who haven't decided yet whether they're going to be friends. You're 8, Sophie said. I'm 10. I know, Lily said. Mom told me. Do you like horses? I love horses. Sophie slid the paper placemat and a fistful of crayons across the table. I'm drawing one, but I can't do the legs. The legs are impossible. You can help. And just like that, it was done the way it's only ever done between children, without negotiation or caution. Two kids who'd both lost a parent finding each other over the impossible problem of how a horse's legs work. Lily climbed into the booth beside Sophie, and the two of them bent their heads together over the paper, and the adults were for a moment entirely forgotten. Megan slid into the booth across from Adrian and watched the girls and felt her throat tighten. She lost her mom, Megan said quietly. And mine lost her dad. And look at them. Look at them, Adrian agreed. His voice was rough. Kids are smarter than we are about this. They don't perform their grief. They just carry it, and then they go figure out how to draw a horse. He cleared his throat. Coffee here really is terrible, by the way. You weren't lying. I've had 2 cups and I think I've gone blind in one eye. Megan laughed, and the laugh chased the last of the night's doubt out of her. A waitress she'd worked beside for 6 years came over Donna, who'd covered Megan's shifts the week of Daniel's funeral and never once let her say thank you for it. And Donna looked at the table at Megan, sitting on the customer's side of the booth, for the first time in living memory, at the man in the navy cap, at the 2 little girls drawing horses, and her face did something complicated. Well, Donna said, look at this. Donna, this is Adrian, and his daughter Sophie. Uh-huh. Donna's eyes flicked to Megan's, and a whole conversation passed between the 2 women. In half a second, is this for real? Is he good? Do I need to spit in his eggs? And whatever. Donna read in Megan's face, made her shoulders relax. Well, any friend of Megan's. What can I get you folks? And honey, this to Lily. You want the chocolate chip pancakes you always pretend you're too grown up for? Yes, please, Lily said, not looking up from the horse. Make it 2, Sophie said immediately. I'm too grown up for them, too. Donna snorted and wrote it down. 2 grown-up pancakes. Coming up. When she'd gone, Adrian leaned forward, his forearms on the table, and lowered his voice so it was just for Megan. I want to tell you the rest, he said. Last night you said you didn't know the first true thing about me. That's not going to work, not if we're going to whatever this is. So I'm going to tell you, and some of it isn't pretty, and you can decide afterward. Megan's stomach tightened. Okay. The thing Eleanor Vance said last night, the Coastal Resilience Fund. The $800 million. That's real. Adrian turned his coffee cup slowly on the table, the same gesture she'd watched him make at the gala. I sit on the board that decides where that money goes. Federal money, private money. All of it pooled to rebuild the places that get hit hardest by storms and floods. The places that never get rebuilt, because they don't have anybody important fighting for them. The poor parts of town, Megan. The parts everybody drives past on the way to somewhere nicer. He looked up at her. I asked for that seat. I fought for it. I called in every favor 30 years in the Navy gave me, and I burned half of them to get a vote on where that money lands. And you want to know why? Why? Because when I was 9 years old, living over that hardware store, a storm came through and put 4 feet of water in our apartment. Took everything. My mother's photographs, my father's tools, my school books, all of it. His voice had gone very flat, the way it did when he was holding something heavy. And the city rebuilt the nice neighborhood across the river in 8 months. 8 months good as new. Our side, they put up a chain-link fence and a sign that said, Future Development. And that sign is still there, Megan. 40 years later. That fence is still up. They never came back for us. He met her eyes. So when people in rooms like last night's look at me and see a war hero, a captain, a man with influence, they've got it exactly backward. I'm not powerful because I want to be powerful. I clawed my way into those rooms because the only way to make sure they come back for the people on my side of the river is to be the man holding the pen when they decide. That's the whole secret. There's no glamour in it. It's just a 9-year-old who watched his mother cry over a wet photo album grown up and finally able to do something about it. Megan didn't say anything for a long moment. Across the table, the girls were arguing cheerfully about whether horses had knees. Last night, she said slowly, when you let them laugh at me, when you waited, you said it was so I'd learn I didn't need rescuing, so I'd stand up on my own. She searched his face. But it was more than that, wasn't it? You weren't just teaching me a lesson. You were testing them. Something flickered in Adrian's gray eyes, surprise, and then a kind of respect. Go on, he said. You wanted to see who they really were, Megan said, the pieces clicking into place. The people in that room, the donors, the board. You're about to decide where $800 million goes, and a whole lot of those people last night have got their hands out hoping some of it lands on their projects in their neighborhoods. And you walked in as a nobody on purpose, and you sat at the worst table on purpose, and you watched how they treat the people they think can't do anything for them. Her voice dropped. Because that's the only honest way to find out who a person is. You don't watch how they treat the powerful, you watch how they treat the help. Adrian was quiet. The girls had moved on to coloring the horse purple. My wife used to say, I had a working man's heart, he said finally. She said I never knew how to walk into a room and just enjoy it, that I was always evaluating. She wasn't wrong. He looked at Megan with something that was almost wonder. But she never once figured out the why as fast as you just did. 2 hours at a dinner table, and you've read me clean to the bottom. It's not a gift, Megan said. It's a job skill. You wait enough tables, you learn to read people the second they sit down. Who's going to tip? Who's going to send the food back 3 times? Who's going to call you sweetheart and mean it like an insult? She shrugged. Richard Thornton I had pegged before he opened his mouth. The silver-haired woman, too. I just never had the standing to do anything about it. She paused. Until a stranger at the worst table in the room told me I did. Adrian reached across the table, slowly giving her every chance to pull back, and laid his hand over hers. It was a working man's hand, scarred and broad, and it covered hers completely. You had the standing the whole time, he said. I didn't give you anything, Megan. I just got out of the way so you could see it for yourself. Donna came back with the pancakes, then 2 towering plates of them, and set them down in front of the girls with a flourish, and the spell broke, but gently, the way a good spell breaks, leaving the warmth behind. Lily and Sophie fell on the pancakes like they hadn't eaten in a week, and Adrian's hand stayed over Megan's a moment longer, and then withdrew, so they could both pretend to be interested in their menus. But Megan had seen something pass behind his eyes when Donna appeared, a shadow, a calculation, the look of a man who wasn't finished. There's something else, she said. You've got that look again, the evaluating one. Adrian set the menu down. Richard Thornton, he said, is going to lose the chairmanship Monday. Eleanor will see to that, and even if she didn't, the story of last night is already moving through Sterling Heights faster than any of those people can run from it. By the end of the week, everyone in that town will have heard about the gala where a waitress shamed a ballroom and a Navy captain watched it happen. He paused. But losing a chairmanship isn't the same as facing what he did. A man like Thornton, he'll spin it. He'll tell people it was a misunderstanding, that he was set up, that I had some grudge. He'll land somewhere soft, the way men like him always do, and in 6 months, he'll be hosting another gala somewhere else, and seating somebody else at the worst table. His jaw tightened. Unless somebody makes sure that doesn't happen. Megan studied him. And you're somebody. I'm somebody. Adrian agreed quietly. And what I do next is going to matter. Not just for Thornton. For you, for the girls, for the people on my side of the river who've been waiting 40 years for somebody to come back for them. He looked at her steadily across the table, across the pancakes, across the two little girls who had somehow already become friends. So I'm going to ask you one more thing, Megan Carter. And it's a bigger thing than breakfast. The diner hummed around them. Outside, a truck pulled into the lot, and Megan Carter, who had walked into a charity gala 12 hours ago as a joke, and walked out of it as someone else, entirely looked at the quiet man across the table, and felt the ground shift again. Under her feet, felt the story she thought had ended in that parking lot crack open into something much larger, something that hadn't finished with either of them yet. Ask, she said. There's a neighborhood, Adrian said, on the east side, past the rail yards. They call it Bishop's Row, though there hasn't been a bishop or much of a row there in 50 years. It's where the firefighters live, the cops, the nurses who work nights, the people who keep this whole city running and can't afford to live anywhere it would be nice to. He turned his coffee cup. It flooded last spring. You probably remember. The creek came over its banks and put 2 feet of water into 40 homes, and the city sent out a press release and a few sandbags, and then forgot all about it. Same as they forgot about my street 40 years ago. He looked up at her. Daniel's old fire station is in Bishop's Row. Engine Company 14. Did you know that? Megan went very still. Of course I know that. That was his house. He spent more nights there than he did with me. Her voice caught. What does Daniel's station have to do with anything? It's condemned, Adrian said gently. The flood got into the foundation. The city's been quietly trying to close it for a year. Say it's too expensive to repair that they'll consolidate the coverage with a station 4 miles away. 4 miles in a neighborhood full of old wood frame houses. His jaw tightened. Do you know what 4 miles means in a fire, Megan? It means by the time the trucks get there, it's not a rescue anymore. It's a recovery. It means the next Daniel Carter doesn't even get the chance to run into the building because the building's already gone. The pancakes sat half-eaten. The girls had stopped drawing and were listening now the way children do when the air in a room changes. You're telling me, Megan said slowly, that they want to close my husband's station, the station he died out of. They want to shut it down because of a flood and let the neighborhood he died protecting go without. That's what I'm telling you. And the Coastal Resilience Fund could rebuild it, Adrian said. Could rebuild the whole of Bishop's Row, raise the houses, fix the creek, repair the foundation, keep Engine 14 open, and put Daniel's name on it where it belongs. $800 million and a neighborhood like Bishop's Row is a rounding error in that. It's nothing. It's a single line in a budget. His voice dropped. But here's the thing, nobody at that gala understands, Megan. The fund doesn't just pick projects out of a hat. There's a vote, and there's politics, and there are a dozen developers with their hands out, and every one of them wants that money to go to a waterfront condo project, or a shopping district, or some shining thing they can put their name on and cut a ribbon in front of. Bishop's Row has no champion. Nobody important lives there. Nobody who can write a check or buy a table at a gala. It's exactly the kind of place that always loses. He paused. Unless somebody stands up in front of the board and makes them look at it. Megan understood now. She understood completely, and the understanding sat in her chest like a stone and a fire at the same time. You want me, she said. I want you, Adrian said. Not to be rescued, not to be a charity case. The opposite of that. He leaned forward. The board meets in 3 weeks to vote on the next round of allocations. I've got a seat at that table, and 1 vote, and a whole lot of people who'd love to outvote me. What I don't have, what I've never had, is the one thing that actually changes minds in a room full of powerful people who've convinced themselves the poor are an abstraction. He held her eyes. A face. A name. A voice. Somebody who lived it and can stand up and make $800 million, stop being a budget line, and start being Daniel Carter's fire station. I can talk policy at them all day, and they'll nod and vote however their interests tell them to. But you standing up the way you stood up last night telling them about a man who died on a floor that gave way. He shook his head slowly. That's the thing they can't vote against. That's the thing that makes them ashamed to. For a long moment, Megan didn't say anything. She looked at her daughter, who was watching her with Daniel's steady eyes. She looked at Sophie, who had gone quiet and serious beside Lily. She looked at the diner she'd worked in for 6 years. The bad coffee, the cracked vinyl, the whole small, honest world she'd been protecting for so long. "You're asking me to stand up in front of another room full of those people," she said. "After last night." "I am. On purpose. Knowing exactly how they'll look at me when I walk in. Knowing exactly how they'll look at you," Adrian agreed. "And knowing they'll be wrong the same way they were wrong last night. Megan, the looking only has power over you as long as you believe what's behind it. You stopped believing it last night. I watched it happen. I watched a woman who couldn't find words to answer a question about catering turn around 2 hours later and silence 300 people." His voice was low and certain. "I'm not asking you to do something you can't do. I'm asking you to do the thing I already saw you do. Just one more time. For Daniel. For the next Daniel. For a neighborhood full of people who've been told their whole lives that they don't matter to the people holding the pen." Megan looked down at her hands. They weren't trembling. She noticed that the same hands that had shaken in her lap while Richard Thornton stood over her were perfectly steady now. "Mom," Lily said quietly, "was that really Daddy's station, the one that's going to close?" Megan turned to her daughter. "Yeah, baby, it was." Lily was quiet for a second, thinking it through, the way she thought through everything, slow and serious and entire. Then she said, "Daddy wouldn't want it to close. He loved that station. He used to take me there and let me sit in the truck and ring the bell." She looked up at her mother. "If you can stop them from closing it, you should, even if it's scary. Daddy ran into a building that was scary, and there it was. The whole thing decided in the words of an 8-year-old who did her homework on the kitchen floor." Megan looked back at Adrian. "I'll do it," she said, "on 3 conditions." "Name them." 1. This isn't charity. If I'm going to stand up in that room, I'm not going up there as the sad widow you trotted out to make people feel something. I want to know the project. The real numbers, the real plan, all of it. If I'm going to ask those people to spend money, I'm going to understand what I'm asking for down to the last dollar. I'm not going to be a prop." She held up a finger. 2. Whatever happens between you and me, and I don't know what that is yet, and neither do you, it stays completely separate from this. I'm not doing this because I'm sweet on a Navy captain. I'm doing it for Daniel and for those people, and if you and I crash and burn next month, the project doesn't crash with us. Bishop's Row doesn't depend on whether you and I work out." "Agreed," Adrian said immediately. "That's exactly right. What's 3? Megan glanced at the 2 girls. 3, she said quietly. "They come first. Both of them. Whatever we do, whatever fight we pick, those 2 girls come before all of it. If it ever comes down to a choice between winning that vote and being home to tuck them in, we go home. Every time. No exceptions. Because the whole point of the station, the whole point of all of it is so that kids like them get to keep their parents. And I'm not going to fight for that so hard that I forget to do it myself." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. And then he did something she hadn't seen him do. He reached up and took off the old Navy ball cap and held it in his hands the way a man holds his hat at a funeral or a wedding or any moment that matters. "My wife would have liked you," he said, and his voice wasn't quite steady. "I've been trying not to say that all morning because it felt like too much too fast. But she would have. Those 3 conditions, that's her. That's exactly the kind of thing she'd have said." He cleared his throat. "Deal. All 3. You have my word." They shook on it across the table over the cold pancakes. And Sophie, watching the handshake with her father's grave gray eyes, said to Lily, "I think our parents just made a deal." "Yeah," Lily said. "They do that. Mom shakes on stuff. It means it's serious." "My dad takes his hat off," Sophie said. "That means it's really serious." The two girls looked at each other, and some understanding passed between them that the adults weren't quite part of, and then they went back to the horse. The 3 weeks that followed were unlike any Megan had ever lived. Adrian was true to his word. There was no charity in it. No prop, no sad widow trotted out. He sent her the project files, the real ones, hundreds of pages of engineering reports and flood maps and budget line items, and Megan read every page at her kitchen table after Lily was asleep. The same table her daughter did homework on, until she understood the elevation requirements for the houses and the cost per unit for raising a foundation, and the precise reason a station 4 miles away meant the difference between a rescue and a recovery. She made notes in the margins. She called Adrian with questions at 10 at night, and he answered every one and somewhere in those late phone calls, talking about culvert capacity and federal match requirements. Something else was quietly growing between them, something neither of them named because they'd promised to keep it separate. And keeping it separate was its own strange kind of intimacy. "You should sleep," he told her one night, near midnight, after she'd kept him on the phone for an hour about whether the fund could legally cover the station repair as well as the housing. "I'll sleep when I understand the cost share formula," Megan said. "Read me the federal match section again." "You're going to know this thing better than I do. That's the idea. You said it yourself, I can't go up there as a prop. So I'm going to walk into that room knowing more about Bishop's Row than anyone in it, including the developers who want the money for their condos. And when one of them tries to make it sound complicated, I'm going to make it simple again, because I'll actually understand it, and they'll just be pretending to." A pause. "Read me the section." He read her the section. And when he'd finished, there was a silence on the line, and then he said, "Megan, can I tell you something that's got nothing to do with the cost share formula? That depends. Is it going to make me break condition 2? Probably." A breath. "I haven't looked forward to anything in 2 years. Not really. I do the work, I take care of Sophie, I get through the days. They're good days. I'm not complaining. But I stopped looking forward, you know. After Sarah died, the future just became a thing that was going to happen to me whether I wanted it or not." He paused. "And these last 3 weeks, I keep catching myself looking forward to 10 o'clock, to the phone ringing, to an hour of you telling me I don't understand my own project well enough." A rough laugh. "That's all. I just wanted to say it out loud once. We can go back to the cost share formula now." Megan sat very still at her kitchen table, the phone warm against her ear, and felt her heart do something it hadn't done in 3 years. "Adrian," she said. "Yeah." "I look forward to it too." She closed her eyes. "Now, the cost share formula. Because if we don't get this right, none of the looking forward matters, and I made you a promise that Bishop's Row comes before whatever this is. So, federal match. Go." He went. But she could hear the smile in his voice, and she was smiling too, alone at her kitchen table at midnight, and for the first time in a very long time, the future stopped being a thing that was going to happen to her and started being a thing she was building. There was trouble, of course. There's always trouble. It came 9 days before the vote in the form of a phone call from Eleanor Vance, whose number Megan didn't recognize. "Mrs. Carter, I hope you'll forgive me calling you directly. I got your number from Captain Cole." Eleanor's voice was careful, the voice of a powerful woman who has learned recently and painfully to be careful. "I'm calling because I think you should know what's being said. About you. About the gala." Megan's stomach tightened. "Say it." "Richard Thornton," Eleanor said, "has been telling a story. To anyone who'll listen, and a great many people will listen to Richard even now. The story is that the whole thing was staged. That you and Captain Cole knew each other before that night. That the two of you cooked up the entire scene, the humiliation, your speech, the dramatic reveal to embarrass him and to set up exactly the kind of play you're about to make at the resilience board." A pause. "He's saying you're not a grieving widow. He's saying you're a con. That Captain Cole found himself a sympathetic face to put in front of the board, coached her up, and is using a dead firefighter and a flooded neighborhood to push through a vote that benefits him personally." The kitchen went very cold around Megan. "That's a lie," she said. Every word of that is a lie. I never laid eyes on Adrian Cole before that gala. I sat down next to him because Thornton put me there to laugh at me. I know, Eleanor said quietly. I was there, Mrs. Carter. I watched it happen. I know it's a lie. Her voice hardened. But I've spent 30 years in rooms with men like Richard Thornton, and I am telling you the truth is not always the thing that wins. A good lie told confidently by a man people are used to believing can do an enormous amount of damage before the truth gets its shoes on. He's poisoning the well. By the time you stand up in front of that board, half of them will already have heard that you're a fraud. And it won't matter how well you know the cost-share formula. Megan gripped the edge of the kitchen table. Why are you telling me this? 3 weeks ago you were one of them. There was a long silence on the line. Because 3 weeks ago, Eleanor said finally. A waitress in a second-hand dress stood up in my ballroom and reminded me of something I'd spent 30 years forgetting. I told you that night I was ashamed. I meant it. And I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to be less ashamed, and I think this is it. This is how. Her voice was steady now. I'm not calling to warn you so you'll give up, Mrs. Carter. I'm calling because I want to help you win. I know how Richard works. I know every move he's going to make before he makes it because I used to make them myself, and I am done being on his side of the river. Megan sat down slowly. What do you need from me? Eleanor asked. And Megan Carter, waitress widow, the woman they'd seated at the worst table in the room as a joke, looked at the project files spread across her kitchen table, the engineering reports and the flood maps and the photo of Engine Company 14 with Daniel's crew standing in front of it, and she felt the fear in her chest harden into something else, something that didn't shake. I need you to tell me everything, she said. Every move he's going to make. Because in 9 days, I'm going to stand up in front of that board, and I'm going to tell them the truth about Bishop's Row and the truth about my husband, and I am not going to let a man like Richard Thornton take that away from those people. Her voice was iron now. He already sat me at the worst table once and made it look like the truth didn't matter. He doesn't get to do it twice. So tell me everything, Mrs. Vance. We've got 9 days. Let's go to work. And on the other end of the line, Eleanor Vance, who had crossed her own river, laughed once low and fierce, the laugh of a woman who had finally found something worth fighting for. Oh, Mrs. Carter, she said. I am so glad I picked the right side. All right, get a pen. The first thing you need to understand about how Richard poisons a room is that he never says the lie himself in public. He plants it, and he lets other people carry it for him. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out exactly who's already carrying it. And then we're going to take them away from him one by one before you ever walk into that room. Megan got a pen. Across the apartment in the small bedroom, Lily slept under a poster of a fire truck. And at her kitchen table, surrounded by the blueprints of a neighborhood nobody important had ever fought for. Megan Carter began for the first time in her life to plan a battle instead of just surviving one. The 9 days went fast and slow at the same time the way the days before any reckoning do. Eleanor Vance turned out to be exactly the ally Megan needed, ruthless, where Megan was earnest, patient, where Megan was raw. They met 3 times that week, twice at a coffee shop near the foundation offices, and once at Eleanor's quiet insistence at Megan's own kitchen table, where the older woman sat among the flood maps and the cheap furniture and the homework on the floor and looked at it all with an expression Megan couldn't quite name. You did this here, Eleanor said, running her fingers lightly over the project files. You learned all of it at this table, while your daughter slept in the next room. It's the only table I've got? That's not what I meant. Eleanor looked up. I've sat on boards with men who have entire teams of analysts, corner offices, screens the size of a wall, and you outworked every one of them at a second-hand kitchen table with a ballpoint pen. She shook her head slowly. Richard thinks you're a prop. He has no idea. He's about to walk into that room and find out he's not fighting a sad widow. He's fighting the most prepared person at the table. He's telling people I'm a con, Megan said, that Adrian and I planned the whole thing. Yes. And here's the beautiful part. Eleanor's eyes glinted. He's so busy building that lie he's not preparing for the actual vote. He's spending all his energy on the story and none on the substance. So when you stand up and you know the cost share formula and the elevation requirements and the federal match better than anyone in that room, the lie collapses on its own. Because a con artist doesn't know the engineering, Megan. A con artist memorizes a sad speech. You're going to walk in there and talk culvert capacity, and every person who half believed Richard is going to realize in real time that they've been lied to. You don't beat a lie by shouting that it's a lie. You beat it by being so obviously, undeniably the real thing that the lie can't survive contact with you. They worked out who was carrying Richard's story. Eleanor knew the board, the way a sailor knows weather. There were 11 votes besides Adrian's, and she could name where each one stood before the meeting even began. 3 were locked for the developer's men who wanted the money for a waterfront project and would never be moved. 3 were genuinely undecided, and 5 had been told in quiet lunches and golf course confidences that the Bishop's Row proposal was a setup, a coal vanity play built on a coached widow. Those 5 are the game, Eleanor said. We don't need all of them. We need 4. 4 of those 5 plus the 3 undecided plus Adrian, and you win 7-5. She tapped the table. And the way we get the 5 is we don't argue with them. We invite them to Bishop's Row, before the vote. We let them stand in the flooded station. We let them meet the people who live there. Because Richard's lie only works at a distance, Megan. It only works as long as Bishop's Row is an abstraction. The second one of those board members is standing in Daniel's old firehouse with creek water stains 4 feet up the wall. The lie dies. You can't con a man into believing what he's seeing with his own eyes. So that was what they did. It was Megan's idea to hold it on a Saturday so the people of Bishop's Row would be home. It was Adrian who made the calls. 3 board members agreed to come, which was more than they'd hoped, and it was Lily of all people who supplied the detail that broke the whole thing open. You should ring the bell, Lily said the night before sitting on the kitchen floor. What bell, baby? The bell on Daddy's truck, the one I used to ring. When the board people come, you should let them ring it, because once you ring it, you remember it's real. She looked up with Daniel's grave eyes. That's what Daddy said. He said the bell was so you never forgot the truck was real and the people inside the houses were real. He said you ring it so you don't forget to be scared for them, instead of scared of the fire. Megan stared at her daughter for a long moment, and then she crossed the kitchen and pulled her into her arms. You, she whispered, are the smartest person I have ever met. You know that. The Saturday came gray and cold. 3 board members drove out to Bishop's Row, past the rail yards. 2 men and a woman, all of them in the careful neutral clothes of people who weren't sure what they were walking into. Adrian met them at the station. Megan met them inside it. She didn't give a speech. She'd learned that much from Eleanor. You don't perform for people you're trying to convince. You let the truth do the performing. So she just walked them through it. The water line on the wall, 4 feet up, dark and unmistakable. The buckled floor. The condemned notice taped to the door. The bay where engine 14 used to sit empty now, the truck relocated to a station 4 miles away. This is where my husband worked, she said simply. Daniel Carter. Engine Company 14. He died 3 years ago in a fire on the east side, but he lived here. This was his second home. And the city wants to close it because fixing the flood damage costs money, and the people in this neighborhood don't have anybody to make a fuss. She looked at the 3 of them. I'm not going to tell you a sad story. You can read the engineering report. I'd rather you just stand here for a minute and feel what it feels like to be in a place everybody's decided isn't worth saving. And then, she did the thing Lily had told her to do. There was an old handbell salvaged off the original truck decades ago, mounted on a bracket by the bay door. It still worked. Megan reached up and rang at once a single clear note that rang out through the empty station and seemed to hang in the cold air. My daughter used to ring this bell, Megan said. She's 8 now. Her father used to bring her here and let her ring it and sit in the truck. She told me last night that the bell is so you don't forget the people in the houses are real. Her voice caught just slightly. So before you vote, I wanted you to hear it ring once, so you don't forget. One of the board members, the woman gray-haired, sharp-eyed, a woman who had clearly come prepared to be unmoved, turned away and pressed her fingers to her mouth. And that was when the people of Bishop's Row started arriving. Megan hadn't orchestrated it, not exactly. She'd mentioned to a few neighbors that some folks from the city were coming to look at the station. That was all. But word travels in a place like Bishop's Row, and by the time the bell rang, they had begun to gather outside the firefighters from Engine 14's old crew, the nurses who worked nights, an old man who'd lived on the block for 60 years, a young mother with a baby on her hip whose house had taken 3 feet of water. Families, kids, the whole quiet army of people who keep a city running and never get thanked for it. They didn't shout. They didn't make demands. They just stood there in the cold outside their condemned firehouse and let the board members see them. The gray-haired board member walked outside and stood among them for a long time. Then she came back in and found Megan. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "I came here today because Richard Thornton told me you were a fraud." Megan's stomach dropped. And now I've stood in your husband's firehouse and rung his daughter's bell and met 200 people who came out in the cold for no reason except that someone finally bothered to look at them. The woman's voice was flat and certain. A fraud couldn't have built this. You can fake a speech. You can't fake a neighborhood. She held out her hand. You have my vote. And I'd very much like to know who told Richard Thornton that the people of Bishop's Row weren't real, because I intend to remember their names. By the end of that Saturday, all 3 board members who'd come had committed. Eleanor had been right. The lie couldn't survive contact with the truth. 3 of the 5 became 4 with a phone call that night from the gray-haired woman to a colleague. The math was there. 7-5. They were going to win. Which was exactly when Richard Thornton made his last move. It came 2 days before the vote, and it came at Megan personally in the cruelest way he could find through Lily. The call came to the school. A man identifying himself as a reporter claiming to be doing a story on the firefighter's widow at the center of the Resilience Fund controversy, asking the school office questions about Lily, whether she was enrolled on a hardship waiver, whether the family was behind on anything, whether it was true the mother worked at a diner and couldn't afford a desk for the child to do homework on. The school office rattled called Megan, and Megan understood instantly in a wave of cold fury exactly what was happening. "He's going after my daughter," she said to Adrian, her voice shaking. They were on the phone. She'd called him the second she hung up with the school. "He's digging into an 8-year-old child. To make me look like what a desperate poor person playing the system. To turn the thing that makes me real into a thing that makes me pathetic. Megan." Adrian's voice was very low and very controlled, the controlled of a man holding something dangerous very still. "Listen to me. Don't do anything yet. Don't call the school back. Don't call the reporter. Don't do anything. Let me find out who he is first. That's my daughter, Adrian. I know whose daughter she is." Something had changed in his voice. The calm had gone glacial. "And that's exactly why you're going to let me handle the next part. Because if you call that man back angry, you give Richard the exact story he wants. But if we find out who he is and who's paying him, we don't just stop him. We end Richard Thornton for good." A pause. "You trust me?" Megan closed her eyes. Down the hall, Lily was doing her homework, on the floor. "I trust you," she said. It took Adrian 1 phone call. The reporter wasn't a reporter at all. He was a private investigator on a retainer, and the retainer, it turned out, ran through a shell company, and the shell company, it turned out, was Richard Thornton's. Adrian had 30 years of favors in this city, and it took him exactly 1 afternoon to trace the money. And when he had it, the whole chain documented undeniable, he didn't call a lawyer. He called Eleanor Vance. "Eleanor," he said. Richard hired a private investigator to dig into an 8-year-old child, Carter's daughter, to smear the mother before the vote. There was a long, dangerous silence on the line. "You have proof," Eleanor said. "I have the retainer. I have the shell company. I have the chain back to Richard. All of it. Send it to me," Eleanor said. Her voice had gone perfectly calm, which was somehow more frightening than fury. "And then do nothing else. Don't take it to the board. Don't take it to the press. Send it to me and let me handle Richard because Richard is mine. I helped make him what he is. It's only right that I'm the one who unmakes him." The board met on a Thursday. Megan wore the same second-hand black dress. She'd thought about buying something new, and then she'd decided against it. She'd decided she would walk into that room as exactly what she was, and let them deal with it. Adrian met her in the lobby. He was in his uniform. This time the real one, and it was the first time she'd seen him in it, and the sight of it stopped her for a second, not because it made him a stranger, but because it didn't. He was the same quiet man underneath it. The uniform just told the rest of the world what she'd known since the diner. "You ready?" he asked. "No," Megan said. "But I'm going to do it anyway. That's what your wife's 3 conditions were really about, isn't it? Doing the scared thing anyway, same as Daniel." Adrian's jaw tightened. He didn't trust himself to answer that one. The boardroom was nothing like the gala. No chandeliers, no string quartet, just a long table and 12 chairs and a wall of windows. Richard Thornton was there. He wasn't on the board anymore. Eleanor had seen to that, the Monday after the gala, but he'd come anyway as a concerned former chairman, and he sat in the back with the air of a man who still believed he ran the room. He smiled when Megan walked in. It was not a kind smile. The chair called the meeting to order. The developers presented first a slick presentation about the waterfront project, renderings of glass towers, promises of tax revenue and tourism. It was beautiful. It was exactly the kind of shining thing the money usually went to. And then it was Megan's turn. She stood up. She didn't have a slideshow. She had a single photograph, which she set on the table, where everyone could see it. Engine Company 14's old crew, standing in front of the firehouse. Daniel in the middle, grinning. "My name is Megan Carter," she said. 3 weeks ago I was seated at the worst table at a charity gala as a joke because I'm a waitress and a widow, and the people running it decided I was small enough to laugh at. I'm telling you that because the man in the back of this room—" She didn't look at Richard. She didn't have to. "Has been telling people I'm a con artist who memorized a sad story. So let's find out. Let's talk about the cost-share formula." And then she did exactly what Eleanor had told her to do. She talked engineering. She talked elevation requirements and federal match and culvert capacity. She knew the project cold better than the developers knew theirs, better than anyone in the room. And as she talked, Megan watched it happen, watched the half-believing faces shift, watched the lie die in real time, exactly as Eleanor had promised it would. A con artist memorizes a speech. Megan Carter knew the foundation repair down to the dollar. When she finished the numbers, she put her hand on the photograph. "This is my husband," she said. "He died in that uniform doing the only thing he ever knew how to do, which was run toward the thing everyone else ran from. The neighborhood you're being asked to save is the one he died protecting. The firehouse is the one he lived in." Her voice was steady. "I'm not asking you to save it because it's sad. I'm asking you because it's right, and because you have the money, and because the only reason it's never been saved before is that nobody in a room like this ever bothered to look. I'm asking you to look. That's all. Just look, and then vote your conscience instead of your interests, and I'll live with whatever you decide." She sat down. And from the back of the room, Richard Thornton stood up. "This is exactly what I warned you about," he said, his voice smooth, working the room the way he'd worked 1,000 rooms. A coached performance. A widow paraded out by Captain Cole to push through a vote that— "Richard," Eleanor Vance said, "sit down." "Eleanor, I have every right to. You have no rights in this room at all." Eleanor rose slowly. She held a folder in her hand. "You're not a member of this board. You're a guest, and you're here on my sufferance, and that sufferance just ended." She opened the folder. 2 days ago, you hired a private investigator to dig into an 8-year-old child, Mrs. Carter's daughter, to find out whether she does her homework on the floor so you could turn a grieving little girl into ammunition. The room had gone deathly silent. "I have the retainer agreement. I have the shell company. I have your name on all of it. So, no Richard. You don't get to call this woman a con artist. You don't get to call anyone anything ever again in this city. Because tomorrow morning this folder goes to the board, to the press, and to every person who ever respected you. And by tomorrow night, the only story anyone in Sterling Heights will tell about Richard Thornton is the one about the man who investigated a dead firefighter's 8-year-old daughter to win a vote. Richard Thornton's face went gray, then white. He looked around the room for an ally, for a single friendly face, and found none. Even the developers had turned away from him. He had spent his whole life believing some people were worth more than others, and now in a quiet boardroom, he discovered the cost of that belief all at once, with nothing underneath it. "You can't," he started. "I already have," Eleanor said. "Get out of my boardroom, Richard, you've done enough." And Richard Thornton, chairman, third-generation wealth, a man who had never once been told to leave a room, turned and walked out, and the door closed behind him, and that was the last anyone at that table ever saw of him. The chair cleared his throat into the silence. "I think," he said, "we should vote." They voted. Megan watched the hands go up. The gray-haired woman who'd rung Lily's bell, the 2 who'd stood in the flooded station, the 3 who'd been undecided and weren't anymore. Adrian. And then slowly, after a long moment, one of the men who'd been locked for the developers, a man who'd just watched Richard Thornton walk out in disgrace, a man who'd just heard a widow talk culvert capacity better than his own engineers, raised his hand too. 8-4. Bishop's Row would be rebuilt. The houses raised the creek, fixed the foundation, repaired, and Engine Company 14 would stay open with Daniel Carter's name going up over the bay door, where his daughter used to ring the bell. Megan didn't cry. She'd thought she would, but she didn't. She just sat very still in her second-hand dress in a room full of powerful people, who were now, every one of them, looking at her with the one thing she'd walked into that first gala, certain she would never receive from people like this: respect. Adrian found her hand under the table. He didn't squeeze it for the room to see. He just held it quietly, the way he'd held her elbow at the gala when her knees went loose. "You did it," he murmured. "We did it," Megan said. "Daniel did it. Lily did it with that bell." She turned to look at him. "And Eleanor did it. The woman who asked me if I was the catering 3 weeks ago. She crossed her whole river for this." Her voice was wondering. "People can change, Adrian. I didn't think they could. After Daniel died, I decided the world was just split into the people who get looked at and the people who do the looking, and that was that. But Eleanor changed. That board changed. That man who voted last, he changed right there in the room. Some people change," Adrian said quietly. "When somebody finally bothers to show them the truth and trusts them to do the right thing with it." He looked at her. "It's the whole reason I let them laugh at you that first night, Megan. I had to know if you were the kind of person who'd use the truth to get even, or the kind who'd use it to build something. Richard uses it to get even. You build." He paused. "I had my answer the second you told him you forgave him." Outside, it had begun to rain, a soft spring rain, the kind that fills the creeks. And somewhere across town, in a small apartment with a homework-worn kitchen floor, an 8-year-old girl was about to come home from school to the news that her father's firehouse would not be closing. After all, that his name was going up over the door, and that the bell she used to ring would ring again for real, for a neighborhood that someone had finally at long last bothered to fight for. The rain was still falling when Megan got home, and Lily was already there sitting on the kitchen floor with her backpack still on, and the second the door opened, she looked up with those steady gray-brown eyes and said, "Well, did you win?" Megan got down on the floor beside her daughter in her second-hand black dress, not caring that it would get rumpled, and she took both of Lily's small hands in hers. "We won, baby," she said. "They're not closing Daddy's station. They're going to fix it, and fix the whole neighborhood, and they're going to put Daddy's name up over the door where you used to ring the bell." Her voice broke on the last word. "Your daddy's name is going on that firehouse, Lily, because of a bell you told me to ring. Because of you." Lily didn't cry either. She got that from her mother. Or maybe her mother got it from her, that quality of meeting the biggest moments with a kind of solemn stillness, holding the weight of them rather than letting them spill. She just looked at her mother for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, "Daddy would be proud of you, Mom." "Daddy would be proud of both of us," Megan said, and pulled her daughter into her arms, and the two of them sat on the kitchen floor of their too small apartment in the rain, holding on, and it was the best they had felt in 3 years. That night after Lily was asleep, the phone rang. It was Adrian. "How is she?" he asked. "She told me Daddy would be proud of me," Megan said, and then she asked if she could be the one to ring the bell at the ceremony when they put his name up. A wet laugh. "I told her she could ring it as long as she wants, as loud as she wants." "Good," Adrian said. There was a warmth in his voice that had become familiar over 3 weeks of midnight phone calls, and underneath the warmth that night, something more careful. "Megan, the project's done. The vote's in. Bishop's Row is safe. Daniel's Station is safe." A pause. "Which means Condition 2 is over." Megan's heart did the thing it had been doing more and more lately. "Condition 2. You made me promise that whatever was happening between you and me would stay completely separate from the project. That Bishop's Row wouldn't depend on whether we worked out." She could hear him breathing on the line. "Well, Bishop's Row doesn't need us anymore. It's funded. It's real. It happens no matter what you and I do next." A long silence. "So I'd like to stop keeping it separate, Megan, if you would." Megan closed her eyes. She was sitting at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd learned the cost share formula, the same table where Eleanor Vance had run her fingers over the flood maps and said, "You did this here." The rain was still going outside. "You know what scares me," she said. "It's not that it won't work. It's that it will. Because if it works, then I've got something to lose again. And I spent 3 years making sure I didn't have anything left to lose. It was safer that way." She opened her eyes. "Daniel taught me how to love somebody, and then he died, and it almost killed me, Adrian. And I built a whole life out of never going through that again. Just me and Lily. Small and safe and closed." "I know," Adrian said quietly. "Sarah taught me the same lesson. I built the same wall." A breath. "And then a waitress at the worst table in the room read my whole life off a crease in her dress, and I haven't been able to find the wall since. I keep looking for it. It's gone, Megan. You took it down without either of us noticing, and I don't want it back." Megan was quiet for a long moment. "Sophie," she said. "What about Sophie? She lost her mom. I'm not going to walk into that little girl's life unless—" "Sophie asked me 3 days ago when Lily was coming over again," Adrian said. "And then she asked if you and Lily could come for Christmas. And then she asked—" His voice caught just slightly. "She asked if it would be okay to like you. She wanted my permission to like you, Megan. Because she was afraid liking you meant she was forgetting her mom." He cleared his throat. "I told her that her mom would have loved you, which is the truest thing I know. And she thought about it for a while the way she does, and then she said, 'Okay.' Then I'm allowed." Megan was crying now quietly at her kitchen table. "Lily asked me last week if it was okay to be happy," she whispered. "She asked if being happy meant we were leaving Daddy behind. And I told her," she wiped her face. "I told her that Daddy's the reason we get to be happy. That he spent his whole life running toward people who needed help, and the last thing he'd want is for us to spend the rest of ours running away from anybody who might love us." She laughed through the tears. "Our girls are asking the same questions, Adrian. Across town from each other. The same exact questions. Because they're carrying the same exact thing," Adrian said. "And so are we." A pause. "So let me ask you the question I've wanted to ask since the diner. Not a big one, a small one. The same size as breakfast." She could hear him smile. "Would you let me take you to dinner, Megan Carter? Just the two of us. No girls, no gala, no firehouse, no board. Just a man and a woman who both took down their walls and would like to see what's on the other side." And Megan Carter, waitress widow, the woman they'd seated at the worst table in the room as a joke, looked out the rain-streaked window at the street she'd raised her daughter on and refused to be ashamed of. and felt the future stop being a thing that had happened to her and become finally completely a thing she was choosing. "Yes," she said. "Pick me up at 7. And Adrian, wear the flannel, not the uniform. I like the man who fixes boats." She heard him laugh low and warm and free, the laugh of a man who'd stopped looking for his wall. "The man who fixes boats it is," he said. "Good night, Megan." "Good night, Captain." The months that followed were not a fairy tale. Megan had told Adrian that very first night in the parking lot that she didn't want a fairy tale. She wanted something real, built slow and careful between two adults who knew exactly what the other one was carrying. And that was what they built. It didn't happen all at once. There were dinners, and then there were Saturdays with all 4 of them. And then there were the small, ordinary frictions that come when 2 broken families try to learn how to be one. Sophie testing whether Megan would hold a boundary the way her mother had. Lily working out whether she was allowed to love a man who wasn't her father. 2 single parents learning that the hardest part of grief isn't the leaving, it's the staying. The daily small work of building a new thing in the same heart that still holds the old one. There were hard nights. There was a night about 4 months in when Lily woke from a nightmare and cried for her father and wouldn't be comforted, and Megan held her for 2 hours and felt the old terror that she was betraying Daniel by being happy. And there was Adrian, who drove across town at 1 in the morning when she called him not to fix it. There was no fixing it, but to sit on the floor of the hallway outside Lily's room with Megan while the little girl slept, just so she wouldn't be alone with it. "I keep thinking I'm replacing him," Megan whispered in the dark of the hallway. "Every time I'm happy I think it, like happiness is a thing I'm stealing from his memory." "You're not replacing him," Adrian said. "Nobody replaces anybody. Sarah's still in every room of my house. She's in Sophie's face. She's in the way I make coffee because she taught me. I didn't get rid of her to make room for you, Megan. You don't take up the same space." He found her hand in the dark. "The heart's not a parking lot with a fixed number of spots. It just gets bigger. That's the only miracle I've ever actually believed in. It just gets bigger, and there's room for all of it. Daniel and Sarah and us and the girls. All of it at the same time. Nobody has to leave for somebody else to arrive." Megan leaned her head against his shoulder in the dark hallway, and somewhere in the apartment a clock ticked and her daughter slept, and she believed him. The ceremony at Engine Company 14 came in the fall, a year and a month after the gala. They'd rebuilt the whole of Bishop's Row. By then the houses raised on new foundations, the creek tamed and rerouted, the firehouse repaired and reopened its bay door fresh and strong. And over that bay door, on a brass plate that caught the autumn light, were the words the whole neighborhood had come out to see: Engine Company 14, in honor of firefighter Daniel Carter, who ran toward what others ran from. Half the city came. The board members came, the gray-haired woman who'd rung the bell among them. Eleanor Vance came and stood beside Megan and the 2 women, the chairwoman and the waitress who had crossed the same river from opposite directions, held hands during the speeches like old friends, which by then they were. The old man with the cane from the gala came, his firefighter grandson beside him in his own Engine 14 uniform. And the people of Bishop's Row came, all of them, the nurses and the cops and the families and the kids, the whole quiet army that keeps a city running, gathered in front of their saved firehouse to watch a dead man get his due. When it was time, the fire chief turned to the small girl standing at the front in her best dress. "Lily Carter," he said, "your dad served in this house for 11 years. I'm told you know how to ring this bell." Lily, 9 years old now, walked up to the old handbell mounted by the bay door. The same bell restored, gleaming, and she looked out at the hundreds of people, and she looked back at her mother. And Megan nodded, and Adrian beside Megan in his flannel shirt, and not his uniform, because she'd asked him to give the girl a small, steady nod of his own. And Lily Carter rang her father's bell. It rang out clear and strong over Bishop's Row, over the rebuilt houses, and the tamed creek, and the firehouse that had almost been lost, over the hundreds of upturned faces, over a neighborhood that someone had finally bothered to fight for. She rang it once the way her father had taught her, the note that meant the people in the houses are real. Don't ever forget they're real. And then because she was 9, and it was her father's bell, and she'd been told she could ring it as loud and as long as she wanted. She rang it again and again, laughing now. Tears on her face, the great clear sound rolling out over everything, and the crowd began to clap and then to cheer, and the sound of the bell and the sound of the people became one sound, and it filled the whole gray autumn sky. Megan stood in the middle of it and wept openly and did not care who saw. Beside her, Sophie, 11 now, and inseparable from Lily, the two of them, a single unit by then, in the way of children who've chosen each other, slipped her hand into Megan's. She didn't say anything. She just held on. And Megan looked down at this child who had asked her father's permission to like her. This girl who'd lost her mother and made room in her heart anyway. And she understood that the bell was ringing for her too, for Sophie and for Sarah, and for everyone the world had decided wasn't worth fighting for, and for everyone who'd fought anyway. Adrian put his arm around Megan's shoulders. He didn't say anything either. There was nothing to say that the bell wasn't already saying. Later, after the crowd had thinned, after the firefighters had given the girls a tour of the new truck, and let them both sit in the cab and work the siren until the whole neighborhood was sick of it, Megan found herself standing alone with Adrian in the empty bay, under Daniel's name, in the place where it had all started, where she'd rung the bell for 3 skeptical board members, and a neighborhood had gathered in the cold to be seen. "You know what I keep thinking about," Megan said. "That first night, the gala. They sat me next to you as a joke. 2 nobodies at the worst table in the room. They thought it was the cruelest thing they could do." She looked up at him. "And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. The single best thing. Outside of Lily and Daniel and now Sophie, the best thing in my whole life came out of 300 people trying to humiliate me. They didn't know what they were doing," Adrian said. "Cruel people never do. They thought they were putting 2 pieces of trash in the corner so the room would look cleaner. They had no idea they were lighting a fire." He smiled, slow and warm. "You want to know the thing I've never told you, about why I really came to that gala. You said Harland asked you, a favor, to meet the families. That was true, but it's not the whole reason." Adrian looked up at Daniel Carter's name on the brass plate. 2 years after Sarah died, I'd decided I was done. Not done living, I had Sophie, I had the work. Done hoping. I'd decided the part of my life where I might be happy, really happy with another person, that part was over. Folded up and put away. And I made my peace with it. A man can live a long time on duty and a daughter. I figured that was my portion, and I'd been lucky to have what I had before, and it would be greedy to ask for more. He turned to look at her. "And then Harlan called about the gala, and I almost said no. And Sophie, 10 years old, she heard me on the phone, and after I hung up she said, 'Dad, you should go. You never go anywhere. Mom would say you're hiding.'" His voice roughened. "A 10-year-old told me I was hiding, so I went. To prove to my daughter I wasn't hiding. And they sat me at the worst table in the room, and a woman in a pressed black dress sat down next to me, and the first thing she said was that I didn't look like I wanted to be there either." He laughed softly. "I went to that gala to prove I'd stopped hoping. And I met you, and I found out I never had. I'd just been hiding, same as Sophie said." Megan reached up and touched his face. "2 kids, she said. An 8-year-old who told me to walk into one fancy room, and a 10-year-old who told you you were hiding. They did this. Our girls did this. We were both ready to fold up and quit, and 2 little girls pushed us out the door and into that ballroom on the same night." She shook her head, wondering. "Daniel and Sarah, you think they—" "I think," Adrian said carefully, "that I don't know how the universe works. I've seen too much to be sure of anything. But I know that 2 people who spent their lives loving those girls would have wanted exactly this. And if there's any way at all for them to have nudged it along—" He covered her hand with his. "Then they did. And I'll thank them every day for the rest of my life." They were married the following spring in a small ceremony, nothing like a gala. Eleanor Vance gave Megan away because Megan's own parents were long gone, and because Eleanor had become in a year and a half something between a mentor and a mother, and a fierce protective friend. The old man with the cane came, and his firefighter grandson, who by then had started dating Donna's daughter from the diner. The crew of Engine 14 came in their dress uniforms and formed an honor arch. And the two girls, Lily, 10 Sophie, 12 sisters, now in every way that counted, stood together as Megan and Adrian said their vows, holding hands the way they'd been holding hands since the morning they'd argued about how to draw a horse's legs. Megan kept her own name. She'd thought about it for a long time and decided she would stay Megan Carter because Carter was Daniel's name, and Lily's name, and the name on the firehouse. And Adrian had understood completely. "You're not taking my name, and I'm not asking you to," he'd said. "You're a Carter. That's not a thing the past did to you. It's a thing you carry forward. Carry it." And so she had. She didn't quit the diner either. Adrian had more money than she'd ever be able to spend, and he'd told her she never had to work another shift in her life. And she'd thanked him and kept working anyway 3 days a week, because Donna was there, and because she'd poured 10,000 cups of bad coffee in that diner, and there was no shame in any of them, and because the people on her side of the river were her people. And she wasn't going to stop being one of them, just because she'd married a man who could buy the whole block. She used the rest of her time on Bishop's Row, on the next neighborhood after Bishop's Row, and the one after that. Eleanor put her on the foundations board. Megan Carter, who had been seated at the worst table in the room as a joke, sat now at the head of it, deciding which forgotten places got fought for. And she was good at it. She was the best they had, because she never once forgot what it felt like to be the person nobody important was looking at, and so she became the person who looked. Years later, and this is the part Megan loved to tell, the part she told Lily and Sophie, and eventually Sophie's own children. A young woman came to the foundation, a waitress, a single mother, frightened, and certain she didn't belong. Certain she'd be laughed at, holding her resume and shaking hands. And Megan Carter came out from behind the big desk and crossed the room and pulled out a chair for her, that same old-fashioned courtesy, the one a quiet man had shown her at the worst table in the worst room on the night that changed everything. "Sit down," Megan told the frightened young woman. "You belong here. I know you don't believe me yet. I didn't either once. A man at a terrible party had to teach me." She smiled. "So let me teach you. And then someday you can teach somebody else. That's how it works. That's the only way it's ever worked." The young woman sat down. And Megan Carter, who had walked into a ballroom as a punchline and walked out as the truest thing in it, began the way someone had once begun for her, by simply choosing to look. They had sent a single mother to sit beside a Navy single father as a joke. They had meant it as the cruelest thing they could do. And out of that cruelty came a marriage, 2 sisters, a rebuilt neighborhood, a firehouse that bore a hero's name, and a woman who spent the rest of her life making certain that no one anywhere would ever again be seated at the worst table in the room and told they didn't matter. The joke had been on all of them, because the 2 people they thought were nothing turned out to be everything, and the room that laughed learned too late. The oldest truth there is, you never know who you're sitting next to, and the measure of a person was never the table they were given, but the grace with which they rose from it.